Ladies and gentlemen, we are live on Facebook and YouTube. This is the Behind the Bits podcast. I should let you know who's talking here. This is Scott from Behind the Bits podcast. And tonight I have the person who is responsible for me starting comedy and for me starting this podcast, the Behind the Bits podcast. His name is Tom Dreesen, and he wrote a book called Still Standing, of which I own a few copies and have read front to back. And he is my comedy idol. I don't idolize too many people, but Tom is my comedy idol. And this book made me idolize him even more. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's bring on Tom Dreesen. They're all here for you.
Scotty, I love your new toupee. It looks fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. This is self-done. How are you, Tom?
I'm doing great. Yeah, the book, it's just been so much fun. You said it's still standing. The subtitle is My Journey from Streets and Saloons to the Stage and Sinatra. And I've just been having so much fun since it's come out about 3 weeks ago, and it's selling real good and the reviews are good. So I'm having a lot of fun with it. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, and I'm doing much better now that I've read the book. First of all, I want to tell everybody who's watching, we got quite a few people coming in right now. If you would do me a favor and share the stream that you're watching with your friends, because what Tom has to say here is more important than just us. Everybody that can hear it is going to have a better day, and they're going to have a better week and a better 2020 from hearing Tom. So share that up. I know there's things called watch parties and stuff. I don't know how to do it, but you all know how to do it. So let's make sure that we get a big audience for Tom and we get to talk about this book. So let's make sure you do that. And Tom, I just want to say a few words before I start grilling you about this book. If you remember, going back about probably 7-8 months ago, I approached you to be the first guest on a podcast called Behind the Bits. And nobody wants to be the first guest on a podcast because that podcast isn't doing anything yet and there's nobody going to listen. And you graciously said, yep, let's do it next week. And we recorded that episode, and I have listened to it back probably 3 or 4 times since then. It's by far my most downloaded episode. But the reason why I asked you goes back to when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I saw you the first time on Mike Douglas. And you told a joke that I always get wrong. And it's about a guy offering you drugs, I think amyl nitrate, and he says, you're going to love this stuff. It makes it feel like the back of your head's going to come off. Now, that's all I'm going to say. Could you please tell the joke one more time so that you can tell everybody the thing that got me going?
I did over 500 appearances on national television. I had to come up with a new 6 minutes every time I did it. So that joke, though, I do recall I did that years ago from an actual incident that happened at a party. When I first came out of Hollywood, there were 3 people at the Comedy Store not using drugs. It was me, David Letterman, and Jay Leno. And that's why we're all still here,
Uh-huh.
But I went to one of those parties, and a guy had some amyl nitrate. But this guy said to me, hey, man, he had this stuff. He said, pop this and sniff it. I said, why should I do that? He said, it's wonderful, man. Feels like the whole back of your head's coming off. I said, couldn't I just light up a cigarette and you hit me in the face with a shovel? and anyhow, I did that on the Mike Douglas show. I did that. So, yeah.
So it's funny what you remember, because I remembered that all of my life. I always said it wrong when I said it, but from that day on, when I saw you on Mike Douglas, I was scouring the TV guide looking for your name and watching you wherever you showed up. So you were doing Carson at the time, you were doing Dinah Shore, you were doing Merv Griffin, Soul Train, American Bandstand, Midnight Special, and I was looking for you just everywhere. And you were I was a dorky little 9-10-year-old kid, and you were the guy for me. So, and that came back much later when I had the opportunity to do stand-up. So that's why you're my guy. That you're the one I go after all the time.
Thank you very much. I'm happy that I am I'm sad that your life is so shallow that I'm your guy. There's some other nice, better guys out there, but thank you.
Yeah. And folks, thank you again for sharing this. If you're just popping on, if you share this feed on your timeline, more people will see it. And Tom's got some great stuff to say. I really appreciate that, because this book, Still Standing, which is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It's available hardback, and I've also got the Kindle edition because I like to read in bed. And it's just a fantastic book. As I told Tom, I've read it cover to cover. And I wanted to ask you, Tom, um, at this point in your life, what is it that prompted you to write the book, first of all?
You know, all the years that I toured with these incredible artists, I would journal. If something profound happened that night, or something that I thought was poignant or funny, I journal it. And I thought one day I would, like, just write a book, because that all of the wonderful things in the 50 years I've been in show business that have happened to me, this book is really about a little boy who had 8 brothers and sisters and lived in a shack. We had no bathtub and no shower and no hot water. Raggedy poor kids. If you had holes in your shoes, you put cardboard in there. If a window broke, you stuck a rag in it. We were raggedy poor. This little boy, I'm talking like third person, but would take his shoe shine box and trudge through the snow every night to all the taverns in his neighborhood and shine shoes in bars to help get money to help feed his brothers and sisters. And while he was shining shoes, Frank Sinatra was on the jukebox playing. It was the first time he heard it. And this is the journey of a little boy who went from Harvey, Illinois, hearing Sinatra in the jukeboxes in the taverns, to one day carrying Frank Sinatra's coffin out of a church in Beverly Hills, California.
Wow.
So it's that journey, my journey from streets and saloons to the stage and Sinatra. And all the wonderful things that happened there. But on the way, I got knocked down a lot physically, as you know in the book, physically knocked down as well as literally knocked down. And every comedian that you're going to talk to will always tell you those hardship stories. Nothing that you ever accomplish in life you treasure as much as the stuff you worked so hard for and were rejected so hard for. So that's what the book is about. I like to think it's triumphant, that it's just this journey, and all those times I got knocked down, I kept getting back up. Thus the double entendre. I'm still a stand-up comedian, and I'm still standing. And then the last thing, my grandchildren are going to have children one day, and they're going to say, "What was your grandpa all about?" And I thought, well, now you can look at this book. And by the way, my flaws are in there as well as my successes, but my flaws are in there too. A lot of things I did that I'm not proud of, but that's life, isn't it?
Right. And you became the type of guy who will have a stranger approach you to be on a podcast or a live stream like this and say yes. And I got to tell you, I really appreciate it.
Well, nothing we learn in life is ours. We learned it from someone else or through experience, and you can't take that to your grave. You got to share that. I give motivation talks. I've read literally hundreds of books on the powers of the mind when I was in the military and stuff, when I was out at sea, and every positive attitude book you can think of. And so now I give motivation speeches, subjects on perception, visualization, self-talk, and develop a sense of humor. And you have to share that. If these principles, and they helped me get through some tough times and accomplish things, and I want to share that. I give one to stand-up comedians called The Joy of Stand-Up Comedy and How to Get There. Because this is a wonderful journey you're on. Those of you who are stand-up comedians, you're the luckiest people in the world that you have this gift that you can make people laugh. And I always make this analogy. If they did a survey around the world on the 10 fears of man. They did it for 8 years, insurance companies. And the 10 fears of man, death was 4th. Pain was 2nd. Getting up in front of an audience was the number 1 fear of mankind.
Yeah.
If you can do that. If you're a house painter or a lawyer or a truck driver, and you can get up and talk to an audience for an hour, you're in less than 1% of the population of the world. If you can make people laugh for an hour, you're in less than 1/1,000,000th of 1% of the population of the world. So comedians, you know how special you are. You make people laugh. They're healthier because of your service. That's not even a theory anymore. Laughter is psychologically a deterrent. We all know that. The brain can't think of 2 thoughts at the same time. So if you're watching a comedian, you're not thinking of your problem. So it's a psychological deterrent. Now, because of Norman Cousins, who wrote the book Laughtermath and wrote another book, The Anatomy of an Illness, we found out, UCLA did research, that when body laughs, endorphins are released from the brain into the bloodstream. So after a hearty laugh, after tears are running down your eyes, you go, oh, that sense of well-being. Your body's going through an actual chemical change. So not only is laughter psychologically a deterrent, it's physiologically therapeutic. So comedians are physicians of the soul, Dr. Scott.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things I want to talk about the book is that I read a lot of biographies, and a lot of biographies are, I was a kid, I was poor, let's jump to when I was 20. And you spent a good amount of time talking about your childhood, and you weren't just poor, you were dirt poor. And somebody that has to, when you're 7, 8 years old, that has to go and shine shoes, and that money's not for you to buy candy, that's money for you to take home so you have food on the table. Uh, do you think that you would be where you are now if you hadn't been through what you were as a child? So
No, I
let's
would not.
pretend like you were a middle class kid.
Good question. Great question. No. And whenever I give motivation speeches and I give that childhood and I talk about the childhood in the shack we live in, and I always say that's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I said in bowling alleys, I caddied in the summertime, I shined shoes in taverns, I had a paper route. I grew up in a neighborhood, steel mills and factories, all over the place, in 36 taverns, steel mills, factories, blue collar people. And the mantra in the neighborhood is you only deserve in life what you work for.
Uh-huh.
All you deserve in life what you work for. Now, all the hardships that happened to me in the military and everything, I always went back to my childhood. That I grew up, the oldest cliche in the world is when the going gets tough, the tough get going. But that's very true.
Right, right.
Comedy, comedians, look at what those guys go through, those men and women go through. You're wanted, you're not. They love you, they don't. You're hot, you're cold. Dick Shawn once said that people live from day to day. Singers live from song to song. Comedians live from joke to joke. Your option's up at the end of every joke.
Yeah.
So that background is the foundation of my life, that childhood, and I don't regret one moment of it. And there were some, as you know from the book, there were some tough times.
And the amount of tenacity you showed, from the time you were a little boy all the way up through last year is just amazing. I mean, this book's it's a roller coaster and a lot of emotion in it. So it was a tough read sometimes. There are a couple questions I wanted to ask you about your childhood. One of the things that you brought up is the guy who protected you when you were young, and it was Gucci. And you talked about keeping a relationship with him for 55 years after that. Can you touch on, what kind of a guy did he become? What did he do with his life?
Everett Nicholson was his name. His nickname was Gucci.
Uh-huh.
I grew up in a predominantly black area, and so I played basketball on an all-black basketball team. I played football on an all-black football team. I went ball hawking as a kid, as you know in the book, with the black kids in my neighborhood and all that stuff. But in the neighborhood I grew up in, Everett Nicholson, his father was the first black businessman in Harvey, Illinois. His father had a plumbing business, Nicholson Plumbing. And Gucci, Everett Nicholson, Gucci worked for his dad and they had a hard work ethic, but Gucci was quiet, but he was a classic example of walk lightly but carry a big stick. Everybody in the neighborhood knew you didn't fool with Gucci. He was a great football player too, by the way, but you didn't fool with Gucci because he'd listen. He'd always try to stop violence, but if you brought it to him, Katie barred the door.
Yeah.
And everybody knows. So how he became my friend, there was two guys, Damon and Curtis, in my neighborhood, two black dudes who later became good friends of mine. But they used to, when we got in fights, they would double team me. One would get behind me, the other would push me up. They would always double team me, And one day Gucci was walking by, and he saw that, and he told him, he grabbed him, pulled him off of me, and he said, "From now on, when you fight that white boy, you do it one at a time. You hear me? You hear me?" And they never mess with me again. I'm a little boy. Gucci was older than me. Now every time Gucci'd come around, I was always high. He was real quiet at first by me, and then one day I did an impression of his brother Leroy, and cracking up, and we bonded. We were friends ever since. And through the years, I talked about it in my act, on the Tonight Show, on my album. I did an album in front of an all-black audience called "That White Boy Is Crazy." That White Boy Is Crazy. I did it in my own backyard,
Uh,
and back in Harvey, Illinois. And hold on 1 second.
you're all right.
Anyhow, you ever get one of them dry things in your throat?
Yep.
But so Gucci, when I talked to him on the Tonight Show, when I toured with Sammy Davis, they didn't believe. People thought this was some character that I made up. So we went to Chicago, and Gucci was in the audience, and I'd do the routines about growing up with Gucci. I had a lot of funny stuff about how he protected me and stuff. And when I said, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, he's in the audience tonight, Sammy Davis Jr. come running out of his dressing room at the Milan Theater, came running out on stage. He said, I want a seat, and our audience is cracking up. Said, of course, Gucci waved at him. He later, after he retired from the steel mill, he worked at the steel mill where I lived in the shack behind that.
Mm-hmm.
And he later opened up a tavern. And when I'd go back, I would go back to his tavern. And in fact, the picture on my album is in his tavern. And I should have sent you that picture. We could have posted it here.
That's cool. We're getting some comments from the audience. Steve Frito says, "That's a great attitude, Tom. Thank you for the motivation and the inspiration. Appreciate you sharing your talent and knowledge."
Thank you, Steve.
Steve's actually a friend of mine, so he popped in for me. Another thing I wanted to talk about, and you didn't mention this in the book specifically. Glenn was your older brother and Darlene was your older sister, and as the book states, they were pretty much kind of surrogate parents to you when mom and dad were doing their thing. How did they feel when you finally made it big? I mean, what kind of reaction did they have?
They're my biggest fans. My Darlene passed away, as you know. She had multiple sclerosis. She contracted it when she was like 24 years old, and it took her from a cane to a walker to a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. So every year I'd go back to Chicago and I'd run 26 miles and call it 26 miles for Darlene. And there's a long story about that in the book. But they, when both my parents drank quite a bit. My father was alcoholic. My mother wasn't at first. My mother joined him for a while. She drank with him for years. And then one day later on, after he passed away, she quit drinking. She'd have a cocktail once in a while. But when you're children of alcoholics, I read a book one time called Adult Children of Alcoholics. And I thought I was reading my diary. But when you're children of alcoholics, you bond. We had 8 kids in that family, and those brothers and sisters bonded. We watched one another. And Glenn, my oldest brother, Glenn, was the first strong male figure that I met. When he was 10 years old, he was taking me out to shine shoes. He was taking me out to sell newspapers. He had a great work ethic, even as a young boy. And by the way, he was a tough guy too. He didn't take a whole lot of guff from anybody.
Uh-huh.
And then Darlene, of course, I can't remember a day as a child that she was helping me across the street, holding my hand. If I shined shoes, she would sometimes would go with me and walk the neighborhood with me. If I sold newspapers, she'd help me sell newspapers. She was just if I was an altar boy. I would go to church 6 days a week because I'd serve mass. Darlene went to mass 6 days a week. Only one day she didn't go Saturday. She was just a good human being. If Darlene's not in heaven, there's no heaven. And that's it. Because I never heard her say an unkind word about anything.
Yeah, it's very evident the effect that she had on you, because I mean in a lot of ways really made you what you are today because of the way she was with you, and Glenn the same way. I think he instilled the kind of the toughness and the hard work ethic, and Darlene kind of helped you with the humanitarian part. So it's those two really shaped you, and it's really very noticeable, and it came out in the book very well.
God bless him. Anyhow, and by the way, I see Lou Deck says, "What's the picture?"
Yeah.
Lou Deck is a great stand-up comedian that him and I worked at Comedy Store many years ago together. But more than that, we had a basketball team called the Comedy Store Bombers. And on that basketball team was Lou Deck, of course, David Letterman, Johnny Witherspoon, Roger Peltz, Roger Bear. I'm trying to think of all the guys. Lou's partner. Anyhow, Lou would probably remember all the guys. But Daryl Igus was on the team. Jimmy Walker was on the team. But there's the team right there. What a great picture. There you go. There you go.
Tim Reed was on the
Tim
team.
Reed, that is David Letterman, Tim Reed, Lou, Roger Peltz, great basketball player. Roger, he played at University of Kentucky, I think, or Louisville. And I guess Jimmy Walker, Johnny Witherspoon, me, Bobby Kelton, that's Jimmy O'Brien, Seamus, Roger Bear, the Mooney twins, Joe Restivo, and Lou's partner, Jimmy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Jimmy. And anyhow, and then of course Corky in the middle. It was a little people. We can't. I guess he was a dwarf. I'm so politically correct. Police are watching. Forgive me, but anyhow. Now here's the fascinating thing. See the Mooney twins? That's Paul Mooney's sons.
Okay.
They were our point guards. Now, in order for us on the team that they were on to get the ball, we had to steal it from the Mooney twins.
Yeah.
Pass to one another.
Oh, that's great. Lou sent me that picture a while back, and then he sent it to me again this week, and I appreciated that. That's a neat thing. Talk to me a little bit. You mentioned your mom, and she did get to see you when you made it big, and the big thing for her was the ambassador's pump room, and she was always reading the paper about the people that they saw there, and you finally got to take her there. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, when I was a little boy, I'd bring my newspapers home in the morning. I had paper out, and there was a column in the Sun-Times all the time, Cups column, that the Ambassador East was where all the stars would come to Chicago, and there was a place there called the Pump Room, and that's in the hotel. That's where all the stars would have lunch and dinner, and it was just and they had a thing called the number one booth, and in the number one booth every day in the column they'd say, "Seen in the number one booth, Clark Gable," or "Seen in the number one booth, Marilyn Monroe," or Betty Grable. My mother would read every morning. She'd after 10 and borrow night, I'd bring the paper home. She'd say, "Oh, look, honey, look who's in the number one booth." She'd name these stars, Betty Grable or Marilyn Monroe or Frank Sinatra or Ava Gardner, whoever was in town would be in the number one booth. And I said to her one time as a little boy, I said, "Mom, you should try to get a job down there as a bartender." I said, and maybe you could meet these stars. She said, "Oh, honey, they don't hire the likes of us down there. Southside Irish. They don't hire the likes of us down at the message." Years later, I'm touring with Frank Sinatra, and I'm appearing at the Erie Crown Theater with Frank. And my mom came downtown to the Pump Room, and we had lunch. And the maitre d' like the number one booth, Mr. Dreesen. I said, "Yeah."
Uh-huh.
In that number one booth. And I told her, I said, "Mom, remember you told me that they don't hire the likes of us down here, but they let the likes of us sit in the number one booth." And, and the next day, Cup put in a column. Interesting. He knew the story that I took my mom down there. He put in the column, "Number one booth in the Pump Room, Glenora Dreesen and her son," which was okay with me. And my mom had that column by her bedside when she died.
That's a great story. Hey, I've got a few people who have known you from way back, and some surprise guests. I'm going to bring them on one at a time because I have the feeling if I bring them all in at the same time, this is going to become pandemonium. So I'm going to bring them in one at a time, let them say a few nice words about you, and then bring the next one in. First one is Bill Gorgo.
It won't be fun if they say a few nice words about me. It's more fun when they roast you. Bill Gorgo. This goes way back. That he goes back to my very beginning, back in Chicago. I'm a little bit younger than Bill, but
for about the last 10 years, I passed him. I don't know, somewhere in the aughts, I think. Yeah.
Billy's freeze framing on us. Is he freeze framing on you?
A little bit.
Pardon me?
Can you hear us, Bill?
I can hear you. I want you to know, Tom, I've read your book cover to cover too, and I'm going to read the inside starting next week. But both covers are excellent. The back's got a lot of words, but
Billy's a funny and a good comedian and a good friend, a real good friend. In fact, I had a talk show in Chicago for a while, and Billy was on the staff. He was a writer. He's a terrific guy. When we go back to Chicago, but when I go back and if I can be with you, we go and with all the comedians. It's just so much fun to be around all those guys. Because I equate it to, and then Billy can put it on. I equate it to almost combat. When you're around comedians who've been doing it for a long time, paying dues, suffering on the road, can't get the rent. The gig cancels, all these things. As time goes by, it's almost like we bond when we see one another. We know these are veterans, they paid the dues, and just fun to be around.
That's true of all comedians, but in Chicago, you're leaving something out, and that something is Tom Dreesen. I knew very early on how important it was to pass on what you know to the other comics, to be supportive of the other comics. And I also knew that went back to you. I got that from the first generation of Chicagoans who got it, Chicago comics who got it from you, passed it on to the next generation, and eventually, I was a young lad, and they passed it on to me. But it goes back to you. You started the supportive nature of the Chicago comedy scene, and that it's changed a little bit, but not as much as it has in other parts of the country. It's never been as competitive here. It's always been cooperative, and that's one of the joys of starting in Chicago. That's all on you.
Thank you, Billy. Let me tell you, I was in the business 4 months. I snuck into Mr. Kelly's. Mort Saul was appearing there. At that time, Mort Saul was a big star on television and at records and everything. And I snuck backstage trying to get something out. I was really nervous. I knocked on his dressing room door in between shows, and I figured his manager was going to open the door and chase me away, but I was prepared. Mort Saul opened the door. He was all alone. He said, "Yeah." I said, "My name is Tom Dreesen, and I'm a new comedian. I wonder if I might talk to you." "Come on in." He talked to me for 2 hours before his next show. He gave me advice. He gave me counsel, and he never talked down to me. He never talked to me like well, he said, "Tommy, how we comedians think." I've been in the business 4 months. He said, "How we comedians think." And when I left there, I was on cloud nine. I said, if I ever get to any stature in this business, and a young comedian asks me for advice, I'm never going to forget this night. How great you made me feel.
Then I take back everything I said. And Scott, if you ever have Mort Saul on, I'll be happy to say nice things to him instead. No, Tom, it was you. It was you.
That's good. Thank you, Bill. I'm going to bring somebody else on, but Bill was good enough to be on my podcast too. Before we bring the next person on, I just want to remind you that you can get Still Standing at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You can get the Kindle version. You can get the hardback version. If any of you buy it tonight, pop it in the comments there, and then I can give you a shout out. My nephew Tom Demeester said he saw Tom with Frank Sinatra at Notre Dame about 34 years ago. How about that?
And what a thrill for me, because my Irish Catholic mother would have dreamed that one day I'd go to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And I was a high school dropout. Got a high school diploma from the Navy, but when I went to Notre Dame to appear with Frank, I thought about that. I said, I told my mom, I called her, she was still alive. I said, I finally made it to Notre Dame.
Yeah,
that was a great audience. That was a great crowd.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's bring up and folks, if you're just tuning in, if you don't mind giving this feed a share so your friends can see it. Tom's given a lot of wisdom here, and everybody deserves to hear it. Let's bring up somebody else from your past, a young man named Mark Scheffler. Hey, Mark, how's it going?
Fine, and yourself?
One of the great comedy writers of all time. Mark, it's so good to see you.
You too, Tom. So I listened to the last segment, and I don't have anything bad to say about Tom, but I will tell you a joke that when I first got to the Comedy Store in 1976, I became a regular in the early spring of 1976. The first comedian I actually had an interaction with was George Miller. Mm-hmm. George and I bonded over some pot in the corner of the Comedy Store parking lot.
Uh-huh.
So one of the things that the comedians would do after the Comedy Store was closed is they'd go next door to the coffee shop at the Sunset Hyatt, and we'd sit around and throw jokes at each other and kind of, do postmortems on our sets. And I desperately wanted to get to that table. So one night George invited me, and Tom was a legend by the time I got there. He was an elder statesman. He was one of those acts that when you got to the Comedy Store, no matter what, this guy was above you. You didn't even mess around with it, right? He was there. But with a reputation, and Tom's reputation was like he just said, he was kind and would talk to anyone about anything. And who knew that saying hello, how are you, had a 45-minute response to it? So one night on my first couple of times sitting at that table in the Sunset Hyatt House, I remember it was Tom, it was George Miller, it was Letterman. I think Kelly Monteith was there, Glenn Super was there, Kelton might have been there, and me. And we're sitting around and we're talking. And George says, "Hey, Tom, I got a great joke about you. I got a great joke about you." And you said, "What?" He said, "Hey, Tom Dreesen got arrested." And the table went, "Yeah." And he said, "Yeah, the police officer said, 'Mr. Dreesen, would you like to make a statement?'" And Tom said, "Yes, here at the station and in the car on the way down."
And George did that at a roast. They roasted me at the Comedy Store.
I have never forgot. I laughed so hard because, number one, I was a kid. I was brand new and nobody really knew me. But I love that joke. I've never forgotten that joke.
George Miller was one of the great comedy writer and a great stand-up comedian, dear friend of mine and everybody's. And he's gone now too. But yeah, they roasted me when I had the Comedy Store. They were all new. I had just done about 2 or 3 Tonight shows, so I was making that move before Leno and Letterman made their first Tonight show. So Mitchie had a roast night, and Dave Letterman was the master of ceremonies. That was before Dave was Dave, And Jay was on it. Elaine Boozler was on it. Marsha Warfield was on it. God, I'm trying to think of all the other. And George Miller just cracked the place up, Anyhow. Thank you, Mark. That's a fun story.
So I'm going to tell one more story, and this is I don't want to embarrass you, Tom, but it's the testament to who you really are. When somebody who does something nice, if you talk about it, you can see that if they're a really decent person, they kind of get a little embarrassed. But if they're not, they just kind of stand there and take the glow. I've told this story to Tom in front of people, and I can always see how he kind of like turns inward because it was an act of kindness. My father used to come out and visit me when back in those days, and Tom was, as you know, opening for Frank Sinatra. So my dad used to love to hang out, and one of the places he would hang out with me is at the Improv, and he got to know a bunch of comedians through me, and Tom was one of them. So one night we're in there, and Tom's there, and my dad's there, and just out of the clear blue sky, Tom turns to my dad and says, "Hey, Lenny, I'm going to be in Pittsburgh with Frank in 3 weeks. You want to come?" And like my father is of that generation, right? He was of that generation. Sinatra was his god. So my dad says, yeah. So like a couple of 3 weeks later, whenever the date was, the next day I get a call from my dad and I hear "greatest night of my life." And then a beat. It said, no, when you were born, that was the greatest night of my life. This was the second greatest night of my life. And I said, "Dad, it's okay. If it was the greatest night of your life, I'm thrilled." But this guy, Tom Dreesen, is this guy who does these unsolicited acts of kindness that nobody ever expects. And that's the testament to the quality of the life that this guy leads.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, I do remember your dad, you coming to that show. The wonderful thing about Frank Sinatra, in the 14 years, 50 cities a year, wherever we were, whoever I brought backstage, he never, ever, ever said no. I mean, of course, my mom, but I brought back bartenders. I brought back guys who drove a bread truck. I brought the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. I brought the senators. I mean, whoever I brought back, he never said no. In fact, he always treated the cliche, the little guy. If I said, "This is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Dan Rosenkowski from Chicago," he'd say, "Oh, it's nice to meet you." And he was very polite. But if I said, "This is, Harold Dean drove a bread truck back in he'd go, "Really? Now tell me, what kind of bread was it? Was it the Italian bread?" He would treat that little guy so much more special, you know what I'm saying? Or the corner bartender. And so Lenny, whoever I brought backstage to meet Frank, he was always gracious. He never, ever said, "Tommy, no, I got things to do." He never, ever turned me down. God bless him.
Well, it's like probably the reason why you guys clicked and gelled together, because you both had that same, you never lost sight of the fact of where you came from and what the journey was.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you bring that up, and in the book you'll see a lot of interesting things about that. But when you're with Frank Sinatra, this is the great Frank Sinatra. I mean, this is a guy who walked to the microphone and got standing ovations, and he hadn't sung a note. Not a note. How 20,000 people would rise to their feet and electrified by his mere presence. And by the way, I was a fan. The one reason I stayed with him as many years as I did, he never knew how much in awe of him I was. I never let him see that, because I picked up on that when I first started touring with him. He had millions of fans. He didn't need another fan. So when I, when I'd be alone with him in the car, he stayed up till dawn. He never went to bed till the sun came up, whether we were on the road or off the road. So,
yeah, George Slaughter told me that same thing.
Yeah, he never went to bed till the sun came up. And I'd be driving around the desert, but when we got in the car alone some nights, he wasn't Frank Sinatra and I wasn't Tom Dreesen. I was a kid from the south side of Chicago and he was a kid from Hoboken.
Yeah.
And we somehow talked like two guys. It's hard to believe that because I was in awe of him as well. You know how many times I wanted to say to him, "Boy, when you did From Here to Eternity," or tonight when you killed that audience, but I'd be gushing over him, and he didn't want that.
Yeah.
And so, but he'd come, this kid from Hoboken, and he'd start telling me about his childhood. And first of all, I had 3 children, a girl, boy, girl. He had 3 children, a girl, boy, girl. I'm half Sicilian. He's half Sicilian. We had a lot in common, and yet he was still heads and shoulders above me as far as a career. But when you got alone with him, he was just another guy like we are when we hang out. Comedians love to hang out after the shows or before the shows.
One of my favorite quotes in the book is Frank says, "If I'm a saloon singer, then Tommy is a saloon comedian." By that, I mean we're just a couple neighborhood guys.
Yeah, that touched me so much when he told that reporter that.
Mm-hmm.
The reporter came up to him trying to be kind of cute. I knew the reporter. We were at Patsy's restaurant in New York, and the reporter was walking out, and he walked over to the table and he said to Frank, "Why do you keep this guy Dreesen with you, Frank, all these years? Why do you keep him?" And Frank said, "You mean besides the fact that he's funny?"
Yeah.
Said, yeah. And Frank said, "Well," that quote. He said, "Well, if I'm a saloon singer, then Tommy's a saloon comedian." By that, we're just a couple of neighborhood guys. And that's what we were when we got alone in the car. It's hard to believe that. And I would pinch myself sometimes. I tell a story in the book, but it's true. One night, we were driving alone in the desert, his house, this compound, and he told me a very personal story. A story, he told it, he said, "I shouldn't have told you that." And I said, "Well, it won't go any further than this car." He said, I know, but I shouldn't have told you that." I said, "Well, like I said, it's not going to go any further than this car. And by the way, it's not like we're strangers, we're friends." I said, "We're not strangers." And I don't know what made me do it. I'm driving, I looked at him, I said, "Strangers in the night, exchanging glances." He said, "Oh my God, if you're going to sing this song, get in key." And he started singing to me, "Wandering in the Night." I said, "What were the chances?" And we're doing the back and forth, right? Now we put in the compound and we get in, and he always said to me, "Good night, Tommy." He'd say, "Good night, Tommy." And I'm walking to the bungalow, and I'm thinking, if I went back to my own neighborhood in the corner taverns, and I told all my buddies who I used to be a bartender, I was riding around with Frank tonight, we were singing "Strangers in the Night," they'd go, "Get the hell out of here with that." But it happened, and it's a night I'll never, ever forget. It was wonderful.
That's great. Mark, I got to tell you, the fact that you mentioned that Tom can talk, he was a great first guest on the podcast because I brought him on and I said, "Okay, go." And I didn't have to say another word. So it was beautiful.
I'm embarrassed, but I'll tell you, my manager, Dan Wiley, God rest his soul, a guy from Canada once called him years ago and said, "I have to, can I swear on it?" "I can't swear on this. No, we're on Facebook."
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
I'll do it another way. But my manager said, the guy from Canada said, "I got to interview your client, Tom Dreesen. Can you give me some things to say that will open up conversation?" My manager said,
"Hello."
And my manager said, "Ask him how his day went and then get the hell out of his way."
Hey, Mark, thank you for stopping by.
David Letterman's forward in his book, Mark, I don't know if you ever read it, but his forward in his book says just what you said.
Yep, it's hilarious. Yeah.
I'm going to get a copy and you're going to sign it to. I'm going to arrange for you to get it to you to sign it for me.
I will, Mark. But could you get 10 copies and kind of give them away to your friends? We'll meet at Jerry's Deli, Mark.
Absolutely.
It's good to see
Thank you, Mark.
See you, Tom.
Good to see you, Mark. Thank you.
Hey, before I bring the next surprise guest out, I do want to let folks know that we're about halfway through here. If you write the word "hey" in the comments, either in Facebook or YouTube, just write the word "hey." You will be in a drawing to win an autographed copy of this book still standing. This very book right here. You're going to get this out. You're going to get this autographed by Tom, and it's going to come to you. So say hey sometime during the night, and you will get an autographed copy. Hey, I got somebody else here for you, Tom. Oh, before we talk to Nick, Sean Eli Breitbart says, let's try this again. Tom, I was at the New York Comedy Coalition over a decade ago. When you spoke, I really appreciate it. As a new comic, then it was meaningful. So,
Sean, I appreciate that. That's the talk I told you I give the comedians. It's a motivation speech, but it's also, if they're new, it's instructional, but it's a motivation speech called The Joy of Stand-Up Comedy and How to Get There, you know, how to enjoy this journey. And thank you, Sean. I'm glad it helped you.
mm-hmm. So we got this guy here, Nick Carmen Cosentino. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he said he wanted to come on and say some nice stuff about you. So Nick, go ahead.
When you got it,
you know what the truth is, Tom's been in my life since '77. He doesn't know it. When I was a young comic, I started comedy in May of '77, and all I kept hearing from the people back then, Larry Reeb, Jeff Allen, Ted Holum, and on and on and on, all the guys from that came after you, because after the La Pub or the Pickle Barrel, and it came to the Comedy Cottage or the Comedy Womb. And I go, who the hell is this Tom Dreesen guy? So they started giving me these little tidbits of wisdom that I have carried my entire life with me, and not just for comedy, but for anything. And one is there are two words in show business: show and business is the bigger word. And you supposedly said that. I'm assuming you did. It sounds like you. And the other one is you can come to LA 6 months too early, but you can never come 6 months too late. Did you say that?
Yes.
Yeah. But those were guides for me as a young comic. And I never made it to LA because I went to New York and I just stayed there. I love New York. I did live in Van Nuys for, I don't know, 6 months. And as you know, back then, this was the late '70s. It was, if you're unknown, it's impossible to break in at the Comedy Store. I would have eventually, I'm sure. But I got it too, right here. And matter of fact,
I just want to cover up my face while you guys are talking. So
I'm embarrassed because I have it too
there
here.
you are. Triplets. All right. Tom and I have gotten to know each other a little more over the last, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years. But he's been in my life for 43 years. That was the start of it. Then there were other times that his name would come up. Billy Rizzo was my first manager. I lived in Vegas at the time. You remember Billy? He used
Sure.
to book the Playboy Club. And when he found out I was from Chicago, he said, oh, yeah, Tom Dreesen's from Chicago. I said, oh, you know Tom? He goes, yeah, the guy's so sweet. If you were diabetic, you would die. That's what he used to say about you. And he was real. And I did a favor for Billy and Jackie Gale once because Bill Acosta drove a car to Lake Tahoe when he wasn't supposed to. It was Miriam Anka's car, and Paul Anka's sister, who had a car dealership. So she was going to have him arrested. So they flew me out there, and I had to drive back. I didn't know that it was a 10-hour ride from Lake Tahoe to back to Vegas. And so they rewarded me by giving me a Playboy Club gig. I headlined the Playboy Club in 1980. And you were there at the same time, like a week or two later at Geneva.
Mhm.
And I went to see you in Geneva. I know you don't remember me. I probably was brief in my introduction. And another time that we met, I was performing in New Jersey on the shore, and you happened to be there in the audience. It was myself and Do you know the legendary Wid by any chance, Tom?
Yeah. Yeah, we just
It
talked
was
about
Wid, it was Wid and I. We were doing a show, and after the show, on the sidewalk outside of the club, you started talking. Well, it was 2 hours later before I got to go home. So yeah, like I said, you've been spottedly in my life for a long time. I'm sorry I never made it to LA. I probably would have done okay. I just LA for some reason just didn't suit me. And there's a lot of comics in New York that you know, Tom. I know that just didn't want to make that move, and I was one of them. But I was in New York. I was well known around the country, and I had a wonderful, wonderful career. And but I want you to know you've been my guiding light for 43 years.
I'm touched by that. I, by the way, am not fond of Los Angeles. I've never was. I don't fit in well here. When I hang out, I always hung out with former street guys like myself. Even my Italian buddies out here are, Frankie Valli and Dennis Farina, God rest his soul, Frankie Avalon, James Darren, Joe Mantegna, Harry Sneeze. They're all guys from the neighborhood, back from the old neighborhood. Joe Pesci. We're from different neighborhoods, but we're all neighborhood kind of guys. I didn't identify well with the Hollywood people. I was fortunate when I toured with Frank Sinatra that he introduced me to people who were so comfortable in their skin. They weren't young, coke snorting, crazed young celebrities. But the reason that you had to come here was business, as Nick pointed out. We're in show business. 2 words: show and business. In those days, in 1975, wherever you went in America, people say, "What do you do for a living?" You say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." The next question out of their mouth was, "Oh yeah, have you ever been on Johnny Carson?" If you haven't been on Johnny Carson, in the eyes of America, they didn't think you were a comedian. So we all knew, how do we get to Johnny Carson? Freddie Prinze did one appearance on the Tonight Show, got a sitcom the next day. The next day, he was on the cover of Time magazine like 2 weeks later. One appearance on the Tonight Show. So, and I did one appearance on the Tonight Show. The next day, CBS signed me to a development deal. A guy named Lee Curlin from New York was watching the show that night. I was on my rear end, drawing unemployment. I had a wife and 3 kids. And one day, and the next day, my whole life changed. I've never stopped working. So that was the reason we came out of it, because of the business. So you would say, well, how do I get on the Tonight Show? You would watch those comedians that scored on the Tonight Show, and you had the right material that could make grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, and the kids laugh. You couldn't do any blue material. You couldn't say hell, because there wasn't cable television.
Yeah.
Television was this big, ABC, NBC, CBS, so I came out here. Fortunately, when I came out here working at the Comedy Store, I met lifelong friends, David Letterman being one of them, of course, and Jay Leno, and the guys that were on earlier here. Lou Deck was, all those guys. We played basketball together. We played, softball together. But I still wasn't in the Hollywood scene, and I'm not to this day. I'm very uncomfortable around show business people who think just because they're on a sitcom that they look down on you. They have this condescending view of you. That they think that limos are supposed to take them everywhere and red carpets roll out for them. They're prima donnas, and I'm from the streets. I don't have a degree from academia, but I got a doctorate from the streets, and I identify more with people like that. Like Nikki, for an example.
Mm-hmm.
That's why.
Speaking of that, in a sort of the same vein, when I remember, I would after every show, I would stand near the door and thank people coming out. I felt that was my job. That if they came to see me, then I could at least thank them for coming. And so I remember a young comic once told me, "Why do you do that? I want to go. Because he drove with me." I go, "Hey, this is business. I wanted people to remember me and like me, and I genuinely wanted to thank them. But the accolades always made me uncomfortable. Are you uncomfortable when somebody is complimenting you after a show? It's always uncomfortable, and I didn't know ever how to take care of that part of it.
By the way, Frank Sinatra couldn't take a compliment. He would brush it off. I'm always been uncomfortable, but I remember an acting class in Chicago. I studied with a married couple called Madeline and Joe Young, and then Joe Young was tough on the actors. And one night I did something good, and he said, "Now that," and he complimented me, and I was like hemming and hawing. And he said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "I don't know. I just have trouble sometimes taking a compliment." And his wife said, "Why don't you just say thank you and shut up?" From that point on, Mickey, that was when somebody said, "Oh, I really enjoyed your show," I'd say thank you and shut up, you know. or I would always compliment them. They'd say, "You were really funny tonight." I said, "Oh, you're a great crowd. You know, you're a great crowd." I'd give them the credit, you know.
I didn't deal with another thing I didn't deal with a lot was hecklers. I would be doing my bits, and then I had a nice roll going, and somebody would heckle me, and I would just turn to them and go, "I hate you, shut up," and go right back into my bit, and it became my heckler. You know, and it worked all the time. That was the surprising.
Oh, that's a great line. I wish I'd have known. There were nights I wish I'd have had that line. That's a good line. Yeah.
Well, Nick,
I'll tell you a great heckler story. One night at the improvisation, I'm doing Tonight shows, and like I say, every time you do the Tonight show, you had to do a new 6 minutes. So I had my tape recorder. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. There's 17 people in the audience. They're all scattered, and I'm just trying to find the rhythm of these new jokes. So over in the darkness, I couldn't see the guy, but I did a line, and it got a laugh. The guy in the darkness fired back another line. It got a bigger laugh. So, you know, I'd do a joke and I'd get a laugh, and he'd say something from the darkness. It got a bigger laugh. And now the audience is really in on it. Now, I can't see who the guy is because the light's in your face. And each time I do something, I'd get a laugh. He'd get a bigger laugh with his retort. And finally, I did a line to him, and it got a good laugh. He did a line back to me, got a bigger laugh. And I did a line back to him, got the biggest laugh of the night. And everybody applauded him. And I should have left the guy alone because he was so clever. He wasn't a mean guy. He wasn't a heckler. He just was a guy. So now I go back to center stage, and I think about it, and I go back into the darkness, and I look under, and I say to the guy, "Just between you and me, I won that one." And from the darkness, he said, "Just between you and me, you needed it."
That's great.
Later, after the show, I go out in front of the guys out there, and he's a real nice guy. I remember he was from Aurora, Colorado. And I said to him, "Are you a comedian?" He said, "No, no." I said, "Do you write comedy?" "No." He said, "I'm just visiting my sister here." And I said, "You're not a comedian, you're not right?" "No, no." I said, "Are you in show business?" "No, no." I said, "Would you do me a favor?" I gave my card. I said, "If you think of funny things like tonight, send that to me." I gave my address. He never got in touch with me because this guy would have been a terrific writer for stand-ups.
I think once in a while we all meet that person that's just innately funny. You know, they don't mean to be, they just are. You know, and there's a certain brilliance about them too. You know, a deep intelligence. And you find those people maybe 1 out of every 100 people or something like that, I think. And he sounds like one of those.
Lenny Bruce hung around with a guy that later hung with Rodney Dangerfield. I think his name was Ansis, Joe Ansis. And he was one of those table guys. He couldn't get up on stage and be funny, but sitting around with him, you'd bring a pen and paper because he just spewed out the funniest lines. And those guys both used them a lot, you know. There were, like, you're right. There are a lot of people that can't get up on stage and be funny, or they can't, you know, like, but they've got these clever minds and stuff, you know. And by the way, writing comedy and a sitcom and writing comedy for a stand-up comedian are two different animals.
Absolutely, yeah.
On a sitcom, you can write tee-hees, what I call tee-hees. You know, "Oh, close the door, Harold." You know, to hear this sweet, you know. But when you are out there alone, it better be guffaws, not tee-hees. You know, I can write tee-hees all day long. It's the guffaws that you search for.
Well, and not only that, but it's about you. It should be about you and your observations, but a lot of it is personal about you. So, you don't want a TE on your own life story. Or
to the new comedians out there, if you new comedians are listening, Jack Benny gave me the best advice that I always pass on. He said, when you're a new comedian, when you're a star, you can go out and open your opening line is about the government or the airlines because they came to see you. But when you're a new comedian, he said, your first 8 to 10 minutes should be about you. Tell me about where you're from. He told me, I was doing a show in Chicago. I'd been in business just a short time. And he said to me, "Tommy, when you do your first Tonight Show," well, the Tonight Show was the furthest thing from my mind. But he said, you first go out there. In those days, 26 million people watch that show. He said, you go out in front of 26 million strangers. Don't walk out there and tell them about the government or the airlines. Tell them about you, where you're from, So now they know your accent. You come from Harvey, Illinois, a suburb on the south side of Chicago.
Yeah.
You have 8 brothers and sisters. You went to Catholic school. You do those. You played basketball on an all-black basketball team. So after 8 minutes on the Tonight Show, in front of 26 million strangers, when you walk off, they'll say, "Isn't he funny?" And you know he's from Harvey, Illinois. He went to Catholic school. You left part of you out there. You introduced yourself to 26 million strangers, but they now know about you through laughter.
Right.
It was great advice that I followed all the time.
Yeah. It
Nick,
took me
thank you
half
so
my
much for
career.
being on.
Hey, Scott, nice meeting you too.
Yeah, yeah.
And
We're going to have to get together
Hi.
and talk comedy. I've got a podcast you might have heard of called Behind the Bits, so maybe we can talk on there.
Okay, it sounds good. Tom,
Thank-
again, thanks for being in my life for 43 years, and great book. And
I hope-
listen, it was going to be sometime before I saw you, so I wanted you to sign it. I couldn't wait, so I signed it myself.
Way to go.
I'll see you later, buddy.
Thanks, Nick.
everybody.
Before we go on to the next segment, we've got the book is still standing, and it's available at Barnes & Noble and Amazon. You can get hardcover. You can get the Kindle edition. It's a fantastic book. I read it in 3 nights. I stayed up late because I couldn't stop turning pages. So it's a fantastic book. It's still standing, and that's why Tom's here tonight. Tom, do you have to be anywhere?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay, because we're running a little long. Hey, I've got a couple people who approached me about asking you some questions. I'm going to bring them on, but first, I want to show a couple pictures that didn't make it in the book. The first one is some dude named Scott Curtis, just giddy when he finally gets to meet you in person and in Valparaiso, Indiana, after seeing your Sinatra show. That's probably the giddiest you've ever seen me because I'm pretty stone-faced. And the next one, my wife's going to be mad at me, but the next one's all 3 of us together. Those didn't make the book, but I wanted to put them up.
Yeah, that was a fun show that night, Valparaiso, Indiana. That's my one-man show where I do. It's called An Evening of Laughter and Memories of Sinatra. Sometimes I call it the Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh, and I may start calling it Still Standing. The show because of the popularity of the book so far. But all it is I, as you know, I come out and do stand-up comedy, but then I go to a bar and I segue over to a bar, and there's a bottle of Jack Daniels on the bar, and I tell a fun to laugh, and then all the lights go out, and then Frank Sinatra appears on the screen singing "It's 2:45. There's no one in the place except you and me," a saloon song. And then when he gets to the chorus, "Make it one for my baby, one more for the road," he goes off screen and the spotlight hits me, and now the audience is in a bar with me, and I've come home, and I take them on that journey.
Yeah, it was a great show, and I was so glad I was able to see it. It was one of the highlights of my year last year. It was just fantastic. So I've got a couple folks. First off, Johnny Vegas says greetings from a former Lions, Illinois boy. So, hey Johnny, how are you? And I've got a couple people who want to come on and ask you a question. So Drew actually ran his question by me, and you may have already answered it, but Drew wants to come on and ask you something. We'll see if he asks the same question that Lou started. Hey, Drew.
Hey, how you doing?
All right.
Man, I'm fired up. This is great, man.
This is Tom Dreesen, by the way.
Yeah, Tom, what a great story. I love hearing from you, and this is great. Couple things. Yeah, I wanted to ask a little bit. It was already addressed earlier about the basketball team, being on the Comedy Store basketball team, and maybe some of the great things that you went along with that. But also, you had so many different roles and so many different things that you were involved in. And one of my favorite bits was in Spaceballs with the Vulcan death grip scene. And I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that, maybe in terms of the scene itself, or maybe interacting with some of the other people on set and things like that.
Oh, you know how I got that role in Spaceballs? I just gotten a divorce. I'm in a bar with a beautiful young girl, tall girl. Her name was Trish, I remember. And I'm in Santa Monica and at the bar waiting for a table. And Mel Brooks was in the restaurant. And he sees her. He sees a beautiful girl. He didn't see me because I was sitting down. He walks all the way around. He's walking right now. He sees me sitting there. And he goes, "Hey, Dreesen, how you doing?" I say, "Hey, Mel," because I had met him before. I say, "Mel, how you doing?" I said, "This is my girlfriend, Trish." Bye-bye. He said to me, what are you doing Monday, Dreesen? I said, what do you want me to do? He said, well, I'm doing a film. I said, I'll do it. He said, wait a minute. I didn't even finish what I was saying. I said, I don't care. I'll do it. Whatever. You want me to sweep the floor? This is Mel Brooks. Are you kidding me? I'll do whatever you want me to do. So he said, it's a small scene. You're going to have a few words in it. And he said, but I'll pay you. I'll give you a good price. And I said, oh, I'll be happy to. He used me for 2 days. But the scene was in there where I was one of the guards. And I forgot the lead's name, but the lead was going around the spaceship. And I got all the shaving cream, and I'm shaving, and I think it's another guard. And I go, Lothario, is that you? And then I wait. So wait a minute, you're not Lothario. And I'm going, guards. And his ring draws a can of shaving cream to his hand, and he then, when I'm screaming guards, he sprays the shaving cream in my mouth. And I got the picture on my office wall right here. Hit the floor. I die, right? Because he sprays it in my mouth. Now, when I'm laying there, the scene is still rolling. But what they didn't realize, that can of shaving cream was whipped cream, right? But they had set it like on a window for the longest time, and it got like the sun came to it or something. Anyhow, when he sprayed me with it, was sour. It was like sour milk. When I hit the floor, I'm gagging. I'm laying there, but I can't move because the scenes, they're still rolling, And when he yelled, cut, Mel went, cut. I ran to the bathroom. Look. And Mel comes in the bathroom. He's going, Dreesen. He thought I was nervous from the scene. And I said, Dreesen, are you all right? I said, Mel, what the F was in that can? What was in that can? He went like this. He went, ooh, Jesus. It was like sour milk. I had to do the scene 2 or 3 times more, But I was, tasting. I mean, I'll never forget that day, I got
That's
that picture on my.
That movie lives on too.
Yeah.
By the way, Drew, in answer to your question, to hang around with Carl Reiner, and Carl was an old friend too, God rest his soul.
Yeah.
Him and Mel Brooks, the stories they told. I mean, I'll tell you a quick one. You remember the movie The Producers?
Yeah.
All right. It was a play on Broadway before it became a movie. Mel Brooks wrote the play.
Huh. Now,
Larry Gelbart told me that he was on the set that day. Larry Gelbart told me that him and Mel, after the first act, and when the producers, opening night on the producers, after the first act, they were in the lobby waiting for act 2. And a guy came out, and he came up to Mel Brooks and he said, I don't like your play. I don't like your play at all. He said, because you're glorifying Adolf Hitler. That's what you're doing in this play. You're glorifying him. He said, and I resent that. He said, I was in World War II and I resent that. And Mel Brooks looked at him. He said, I was in World War II. I never saw you. Only Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks has got the sharpest mind.
That was great. Hey, thanks for coming on, Drew, and asking a question.
Thank you so much. It was awesome. Thank you.
Hey, Drew,
one more question for you, Tom. I've got Caitlin going to come on, but before we do that, don't forget the book Still Standing is available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You can get it online. You can have it delivered to you. And if you say, hey, in the comments tonight, you're going to be in a drawing. I will reach out to you after the show, and you're going to get an autographed copy of Still Standing, which is about the best thing you can get this year, I think.
Well, I'm going to put hey in there. Maybe I'll win this thing.
Hey. Okay, I'm going to bring on Caitlin Scholes, who is actually I gave away a copy of your book last week.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, I got it yesterday.
A copy of the book last week, and she wanted to come on and ask a question. So what you got for Tom, Caitlin?
Hey, how's it going? It's an honor to meet you. I just wanted to say, like, congrats on over 50 years in comedy. That's amazing. I don't know, that's a really cool feat. So I'm just honored to talk to you right now. My question is, so I'm 32 and I'm pretty new to the open mic scene right now. I spend a lot of my time working multiple jobs just to maintain where I am in life right now. So my question for you is, how did you carve out time and motivate yourself to pursue a comedy career early on, even with all of your other life responsibilities as far as bills and things like that?
Yeah, I got to tell you, Caitlin, what you're going through is the hardest time in comedy. Open mic nights, you go to open mic nights, and first of all, who's in the audience? Let's just say there's 20 people. Them are going to get up there in a minute, or they're friends of the person that's going to get up there in a minute, and so they're not really wanting you to score, because if you score, by comparison, they may. And I've been there. It's the toughest time in your business, but perseverance. I tell you, Bertram Russell once had a terrific line. And it pertains to all of us, but he said, there are people in show business who become major stars simply because they didn't have sense enough to quit when they should have.
That's good. I like that.
And that's our story. Caitlin, you know, we go to those open mics. My encouragement to you is don't give up. Don't give up. If you have the skill to make people laugh on the stage, as I pointed out earlier, I don't know if you heard earlier how unique you are. And people can't do what you do. They can't, they don't. So, that's a gift that you're given. And if you're doing it for all the right reasons and because you love hearing the sound of laughter, you like making people laugh. Get to another point in that, but persistence, stage time. I once said a line that they end up using, and I'm dying up here in the show. But I said, a guy I saw joined Alcoholics Anonymous, a comedian. He didn't have a drinking problem, but he needed the stage time.
That's great.
Hey, I'm Bill and I'm an alcoholic, and then he'd do about 5 minutes, because there's no substitute for that. So every time you get up there, and don't take it personal when an open mic night, if you don't score, because like I say, who's in the audience, other people who are trying to score, but that's stage time. But then look to get on beyond that. By that, now, I would go to every charity. I would call charities and say, I understand you're doing a thing this week for cancer or for the local church or whatever. Would you like an MC? And then I'd go get their program and I'd say, hi, welcome to such and such charity tonight. And maybe I'd do a joke or two, but I wouldn't say, would you like a comedian? Because then they expect you to go over and do 20 solid, hard minutes and score. I'd say, would you like me to MC? I'd like to MC your fun. I'm very sympathetic to your cause. And then when you MC, you do a couple of jokes or two, so that gives you more stage presence, more stage time. There's no substitute for that. And then I'll leave you with this, Caitlin. There's two energies that drive us our whole life. When I read all these books on positive mental attitude when I was struggling, I could never understand the yin and the yang. What is yin and yang? I'd always hear these Eastern philosophy and the yin and the yang. And the more I read, I began to realize that there's two energies we come from. Number one, our ego or our Holy Spirit. Call it what you want, your spirit, your soul, your center. But we're driven by both those energies. Now, when you're born, you're not born ego. You don't know if you're boy or girl, Jew or Gentile, black or white. You don't know what you're just a spirit, and you love everything that loves you, and you gravitate that loves you. That's your spirit. That's who you really are. You were born spirit. Now, well-intentioned adults, sometimes misinformed, start programming our computer. We little boys do this, we little girls do this, our Catholics do this, and our Italians do this, whatever it is. By the time you're 4 or 5 years old, you start developing an image of yourself based on information. Thus, the ego is formed. Now, the rest of your life, your yin and your yang is your ego and your spirit. Your ego and your spirit. Your ego and your spirit. And the ego has an insatiable appetite. The ego cannot get enough fame, fortune, money, power. It simply can't get enough. It will drive you to destruction one day. It'll drive you to a place where you'll fail because it can't get enough. The spirit, conversely, is like that song of the 70s by the Hollies. All I need is the air that I breathe and to love you. That's all your spirit needs. So we're drawn to, we're drawn by those two energies. So if you're driving down the street and a guy pulls in front of you and you slam on it, and you son of a, I'm like, this is my space, my world. You're cursing. That's your ego. Your spirit says, oh my God, I'm glad he's safe or she's safe and no one's hurt, and have a good day. That's your spirit. Stay close to that. If you're in show business as a comedian, because you love to hear the sound of laughter, because you like making people feel better for having had your service, that you enjoy it, then that's the reason. If you're in show business because I'm going to get that Rolls Royce and I'm going to get 5 of those and I'll show all those sons of bitches back home, that's your ego. Try to be in touch with the spirit. Whenever you go on stage every night, by the way, I'll give you now, as they say, I'm giving a lecture now. Caitlin, it's a conversation, not a presentation. You understand? It's like Caitlin, you and I are married. We're not, but you're married. And I'm cooking, and I say, "Oh, Caitlin, geez, there's 20 people in the living room, and I don't have dinner ready. Do me a favor, Caitlin, go out to tell them some of those funny stories that you tell all the time." That's how you walk out on a stage every night. It's our house. It isn't their house. We're always intimidated when we go to a new comedy club or something. I've never been here before. No, this is our house. If they could do what we do, they can't do what we do. That's why they're audience. So when you walk out on stage every night, it's a conversation, not a presentation. Is it your act? You damn right it's your act. It's your job to make it look like it's not an act. So Caitlin goes out there, hey, dinner will be ready in a few minutes. But, I got to tell you, my mom said to me when I was growing up, it's a conversation. Did I overdo it, Caitlin?
No, that's a cool perspective, especially with just the alternate forms of just trying to get stage time. That's really cool. I like that, and it makes me feel a lot better. Just about trying to get more time. So that's awesome. And thank you for letting me talk to you. This has been really cool.
Thanks for coming on, Caitlin. And I am no Tom Dreesen, but I can tell you that I've seen you and you are funny. So keep it up.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks for coming on, Caitlin. I appreciate it.
See ya.
Thank you, Caitlin.
All right. Hey, folks, you still got time to say hey and get an autographed copy of Still Standing by Tom Dreesen that is available at Barnes & Noble and Amazon. You can get the hardcover. You can get the Kindle edition. You can read it however you want, but you should read it because it's great. Tom, I've got one more thing I want to ask you before we end tonight. And everybody who's been on tonight, I want to let you know that this video is going to live forever on YouTube, so you can share it with your friends, and it's always going to be there for you. So if you came on tonight or you want to share this with your friends, probably tomorrow about this time, it takes about 20 hours for it to propagate. But tomorrow about this time, you can start sharing it. So it's going to be there forever. There's one story in the book that I wanted to hear out of your mouth because it was one of my favorite stories. Can you talk about the time that Frank Sinatra saved Johnny Carson's life?
Wow. It might be too long, but, I think that'll give them a teaser to read the book. But Johnny Carson actually did a very foolish thing when he was a new star in New York. He had just taken over the Tonight Show, and he was a new young kid. He'd been a game show host, and he made a terrible mistake one night. By Johnny's own admission in his lifetime, he was not a good drinker. He admitted this. He wasn't. I'm going to digress. When I was a bartender in my neighborhood back in Harvey, Illinois, I noticed my buddies. I'm not drinking. I'm tending bar all night long. My buddies sometimes would go through the 3 R's when they were drinking. If some of the nights, some guys, if they had a couple drinks, they'd become Rocky Marciano. They want to fight everybody in the place. Other guys, a couple of drinks, they become Rudolph Valentino. They want to bang every chick in the place. That's a terrible expression. But they become, very romantic, amorous. And other guys, 3 drinks, and they'd be like Rip Van Winkle. They just, it numbed them. Alcohol affected everybody differently. Johnny Carson would have a couple of drinks, and he would just get silly. And he admitted that. Well, anyhow, he's out with Ed McMahon one night, and they go into Julie's Bar in New York on West 48th Street. And there was a very dangerous guy there named Crazy Joey Gallo. And Crazy Joey Gallo, the 5 Dons of New York could not control him. He killed his first man at 17 or something like that. And and they didn't call him Crazy Joey for no reason. He was psychopathic, would kill you in a heartbeat. And anyhow, he brought in 2 girls in the bar, 2 other guys with him, and they used the back room. They wanted to talk, but he left the 2 girls at the bar, and the girls had mini skirts on. And Johnny Carson walked in a little while later with Ed McMahon, both drinking, and he sees the 2 girls, and he snuck up behind them and put his hand up the dress, and she started screaming, and Crazy Joey came out. And I'm not going to tell you anymore because in the book,
it's a great story. That story alone is worth this book because I was just floored by that story. So the book is Still Standing: My Journey from Streets and Saloons to the Stage in Sinatra. And it's Tom Dreesen's story from the time he can remember anything all the way up until just about today. So, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you doing this. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being the first guest on my podcast. And, like Nick said when he came on, you've affected so many people, and you've affected so many people you've never even met. And that was, I was one of those people. So, keep doing that. And this book is, like I said, it's a gem, and especially in the world we live in right now, I think it's very important to read something like this because it tells you how bad life can be and how uplifting it can be at the same time.
It's been a great journey, and Frank Sinatra's last song he ever sang on stage is "The Best Is Yet to Come."
Yep. Well, thanks so much, Tom. This has been great, and everybody who watched, thank you for watching, and thank you for listening to Behind the Bits podcast.
Who won the book? How do you find out who won the book? Oh, we don't know who won the book.
Oh, I'm gonna tabulate things afterwards because they came so fast that I couldn't keep them. So what I'm gonna do, if you do win the book, I'm gonna contact you via Facebook. And if you win, the only thing I ask is when you get it, you take a picture of yourself with the book so I can put it on the Behind the Bits page and tag Tom.
Okay. Thanks so much, Scott.
Thank you so much, Tom. I'm gonna go off live here.